I would like to discuss one topic that is not that well emphasized in the textbook that you have, and that is the day-to-day negotiation that you experience every day of your lives when you go out shopping, buying and selling. And we call it bargaining mostly. In other words, you bargain for a price, and these are not often not such important things. In our textbook, we focus more on creating value, making the cake, create more cakes, instead of just cutting up pizzas. And bargaining is more a cutting up pizza, cutting up cakes exercise. But there are still important elements and principles that overlap negotiation. For me, they both negotiation, and they overlap because many of the techniques we use are similar, and it is still aimed at creating an outcome. And sometimes a simple bargaining exercise can create some really huge outcomes for that benefit a lot of people in the process. So I want to start off with this uh, slide that you see in front of you, which is the definition of negotiation, which you also have in your textbook. That's not that important for me, but just remember it's a process. So we see negotiation as a process, but bargaining is not a process. Bargaining is more a once-off situation. In the negotiation we teach in our textbook, it's more of a process, and it is supposed to hold over time. Right, so let's just go to um, the stuff that I want to talk about today, which is anchoring. I'm going to start off there. Anchoring is the tags that you see on the price tags you see on every item. If you go to Publix, everything has got a tag, and everything has got a price. And those are, we call it anchors. And you don't even negotiate about those things. You don't call in people from Publix and negotiate about the price. You just accept all the hundreds of anchors you see every day, which are the prices on the various products on the shelves of the various uh, places that you do your shopping. And uh, it's very important because for some reason, as you can see, it's also called focalism. It's a kind of a bias. People tend to accept that price and not negotiate that price. If that is the price, people say, okay, I'll either pay it or I walk away. But they seldom negotiate about the price. So it's got a very powerful influence on you. It pegs down a basis, an anchor from which you will then negotiate if you want to. Seldom we do. We just accept this is the price. We often say just yes and no. And depending if we can afford it. We sometimes don't realize how many of these things we can bargain or negotiate. Let me give you one example. You want to buy a new car, maybe a pre-owned car. You go to the dealership. It has a nice car in the store for $15,000. You don't want to pay. You want to negotiate. You want to use your skills and see if you can get a better price. And you start off with your first offer as $10,000. And the salesperson says, it's ridiculous. This is, as you can see, it's a $15,000 car. That is the price of the market, where this car is sold nowadays at this price. And I will, it won't last long on this shelf, on the floor of the dealership, where it will easily sell again for that price. So it gives you all sorts of reasons why the price is 15,000. You say, well, I have only for 10,000. I want to buy this car. I want to buy it for 10,000. And he says, no, sorry, this is very difficult for us. Well, that's the price. And he says, well, okay, you say, I'll pay you 11. Now that's called a concession. And you must also realize the power of a concession, which is not often emphasized in our textbook. The power of a concession, it kicks in the element of reciprocity. In other words, if I concede by 1,000, you expect your opponent also to concede with 1,000. So you expect the salesperson now to come back and say, okay, I'll come down to 14. And that's at 14,000. So you are on 11, and now he's on 14. then you still negotiate and you give reasons and stories and time. Time, you throw in everything you can. And maybe then you say, okay, well, I'll go up to 12. I'll go up to 12. And he says, well, that's very tough now. My job is on the line, but okay, let's assume I go down to 13. Then you say, okay, well, that's great because now the difference between you and me is only $1,000. And are you telling me that we cannot overcome $1,000? Now maybe the manager will come in, maybe just split the price, and you walk away with $12,000 car, which is a little bit more than what you wanted, but it is still much less than what it was on the shelf for. Now, that is a typical bargaining exercise. In that bargaining, there can be many things you do. You can flinch, you can walk away a little bit, you come back, you can call in some of your friends to help you and play a good cop, bad cop. There are many of these ploys discussed in the textbook where you do. All those ploys can be used in bargaining sessions. Now, if we go to the next slide here, you see this is called the bargaining zone or the BATNA zone. In other words, this is your target price of the buyer. You're the buyer. You wanted this for 10,000, but you'll go down, maybe to 14,000 or somewhere. The seller, he's got the price at 15,000, but he is actually moving down. We'll be able to move down to 11 or 12. So there's an overlap of you $2,000 to $3,000, and this is called the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement, and that is where we can possibly see that a deal will be made in this zone. Sometimes there's no overlap. In other words, you want to pay 10,000, you willing to move nothing, or maybe 1,000 is up to there. He's got for 15, he's willing to move 1,000 down, and that is 11, and there's no overlap. That is where we talk about the BATNA, the best alternative to negotiating an agreement. There's no overlap. There's no chance of a deal. And then we talk about your alternatives. You're at a point of the real base. That is, you're down to his real base, the reservation price, the real base, and your reservation, his reservation price, your reservation price. It's your real base. In other words, below the real base is the walkaway point, the point where you walk out of the floor, out of the dealership. Now, and the more alternatives you have, the better your chances for making a deal. In other words, it's great to create a lot of alternatives. In other words, you're in a kind of a tight situation, but if you have alternatives, you have many ways to jump to. You have many alternatives. You can go buy another car. You can go and buy another type of vehicle. You can go and change your lifestyle. You can do many things. Or you can maybe borrow the money from the bank, or you can do something different. All right, so many alternatives for still making a deal. And the more alternatives you have, the better your chance. We talk about this graph. You'll see again in our preparation, this chapter in our textbook. And remember the concept BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiating agreement, which is a very common concept used in negotiation terminology. Now let's go to the next slide. In this slide, we talk about basic bargaining. Now, basic bargaining, I told you that high anchors gives you a power. In other words, or either extreme low anchors or high anchors. In this case, you said 11,000. His price, or 10,000, his price was 15. So immediately you have power because you have the guts to go outside his range. By saying 10, it gives you the power of a concession. Now you can go down to 11 and then demand a reciprocity. So it gave you power to demand a reciprocity without you creating those powers. You have no power. You have no power. In other words, that's why often we criticize many people for coming with quite crazy first offers in negotiation, but often that helps them to move down and then demand a reciprocity and then make a deal. So it does give you power to come with a high offer. In this case, you start with 10, you actually bought it for 12 and a half, so it gave you power. Then assumptions. You all made the wrong assumptions. You made the assumption that he can only and he told you that he cannot accept less than 15,000 for the car. But perhaps you don't know. Maybe they purchased the car for 4,000. Maybe it was another dealer that brought in the car. Often people, when they buy new cars, they bring their old cars. They want a few thousand for it. They just want a new car. They leave it there for 4 or 5 thousand. I have many examples. And then, so the guy you could actually have purchased the car for 6 or 7 thousand because it's still a profit. But don't make assumptions that, he's got to have 15,000 for the car. He purchased the car for 4 or 5 thousand. So don't make that assumption. Another thing, you can have 30,000 in your pocket. So don't make the assumption by the seller that you can only afford 10,000, which was your first offer. You still have a lot of credits, a high credit score. You can get money from banks. You can do various things. And you can actually, it'll be a big mistake if he doesn't make that assumption, doesn't make the assumption that you only have 10,000. And then in our course, we teach you never leave a victim. Good relationships is the basis of our course, all right? And that is to leave people with a feeling that they want to talk to you again. And that's a very basic, very important thing in negotiation. We want to talk again. So these are very important concepts, and never leave a victim. Victims always come back to you. Negotiate in such a way that, you create a constant value for both and the longer relationship for both. I don't like desperate positions. I just say that's because that's the one thing where sometimes you want to sell something, you have no choice. You can either throw it away or sell it. I often in this situation when I had to move from another house and I had, say, a lawnmower, and I didn't want to take it with me overseas or somewhere else where I'm moving, and I just want to get rid of it. I can either just put it on the street, and then my neighbor came along and said, "Look, he's interested in the lawnmower." In that case, I always say to people, "Make me a price." When I'm desperate, say, "You make me an offer." And and he made an offer at $20. Say, okay, that's fine. I didn't even expect $10 or $5, but he made $20. So said that's fine. So, but anyway, desperate positions are not great because that will force you into making a price. But often it's good to pass the buck and ask the other person to make an offer if you're really in a desperate position. Creativity will make you great. Later on, I have this little personality quiz, which I'll give you, that'll test a bit of your ability to be creative and flexible. But if we don't have flexibility and creativity and if we do have those two elements, you can make many, many deals. And there are very few deals that you cannot make if you do possess those two crucial elements in negotiation. Okay, so these are just a few basic points I wanted to highlight to you. And I think it's not really that emphasized in the textbook. And I wanted to make this video quickly so that you can all be aware of this and not miss out in this session, which was normally a very practical session that we had when we still had in-class sessions of negotiation.